education stuff. That came from one white female child who was evidently abducted and sexually abused. And so the media reported in such a favorable light that that it got, I think, the entire country behind it. And first, next thing you know, you have a Megan's Law. But it feeds into that again, that notion that whites are actually the victims. I mean, how many black children have been victimized in the same way in this
What about
country?
Elisa's Law, though? That's named after a Hispanic,
Hispanic,
youth, right?
yeah. I mean,
Izquierdo?
that's one of the unusual, usual examples. But certainly, I think our country is filled with so many examples of them being white children. But that was for political reasons, another political reason.
Let me get back to the King Day thing, because I didn't give you an opportunity to talk about how the media reacted to that. And essentially, the event there was that the Lieutenant Governor was giving a speech at the official New York State
Right.
King Day celebration, and you interrupted the speech to make some points about your disagreement with the governor's budget priorities.
Right.
How would you rate how the media handled that?
I was very disappointed in how the media handled it, particularly the print media. You introduced me as an activist, and I thought that was kind of interesting because when the media, I noticed that when the media likes some of the things that I do, they refer to me as a community leader. And then when they're not quite sure about some of the things that I do, they refer to me as an activist. And then if they're really negative, they refer to me as, in this particular case, as a heckler, which I thought was kind of interesting. And the other thing that was interesting is that those who reported on this, other than the Troy Record, none of the reporters talked to me about the incident, but they reported it in such a way that you would have thought that they had gotten information from more than one source, but they had not. So I was kind of disappointed in the print media.
And the focus was on the conflict itself,
and
not your point.
The focus was on the conflict, exactly. And so what I wanted to do was pay attention to some of the problems that I thought existed in the budget, the governor's budget for this year. And unfortunately, a lot of that got lost because there was so much emphasis on the actual incident, and that the media, both print and other media, wanted to, play this as something as a conflict kind of thing that sort of got a lot of attention, and that was all they wanted to look at.
Did you have that in mind when you did it? I mean, you obviously know a lot about the media and how they react to things. You must have known that they were going to pick up and perhaps pull that as the one clip of tape that night on the evening news, that here's Alice Green taking on the Lieutenant Governor. Well,
we also distributed materials that details of the problems we had with the budget. And when I spoke, I talked about the budget, and I was hoping that that was what was going to happen. We didn't do it with anything in mind of having the media pick this up and focusing on the conflict, because we didn't actually plan to do this the way it turned out. But we were disappointed that they didn't focus more on the budget issue that we were trying to raise.
You're also saying in that op-ed piece in the Times Union, I think, that the mainstream politicians and the press are uncomfortable with civil disobedience, with confrontation in the way that you did it, not negative ads and all the acceptable ways the politicians do confrontation. Do you think that's, I mean, is that one of your points?
Yeah, I think that, they feel very comfortable when you can talk about Martin Luther King as this, the saint of nonviolence kind of thing, and it's nice. I mean, it doesn't threaten anybody. It doesn't pose any kind of problems, and we have gone back and sanitized Martin Luther King to the point that we forget about all the other revolutionary ideas that he had that would have been threatening to the power structure. And I think they feel really uncomfortable with having someone do that, and also the fact that I'm African American and would, quote, disrespect those who are in power. I think is a problem for a great number of people. But I think what we did was in keeping with what I thought Martin Luther King might have done or might have been involved with if he were still alive. And so I was trying to go back and get people to look at what Martin Luther King was really talking about, rather than accepting just a nonviolent end of piece of it.
You said at the beginning that the white establishment now sort of has control over the Martin Luther King Day celebration and, to some extent, Black History Month. How do you think that happened? Why did that happen? And do you think the African-American community could be doing more, should be doing more of the kind of thing that you're doing to wrest control back?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of pressure put on the power structure to recognize Martin Luther King as a true leader that he was, and to make him acceptable. So that, I mean, as you know, there was still some reluctance on the part of a number of states, and we still don't have Martin Luther King celebrated in New Hampshire. And Ronald Reagan was reluctant to sign legislation that made Martin Luther King Day a federal holiday. So in order to accept it, with all this pressure that took place, the civil rights movement, he had to be reinvented almost, and made to be a different person than what he was at the time of his death. I mean, he's very critical of the power structure and very critical of the war that we were involved in. And so, forced to accept him, I think they had to go back and make him into something very different that was acceptable. And so they also use him in many ways. Martin Luther King Day is a day when you can come, especially politicians or other people can go and attend the Martin Luther King Day celebration. It's okay, and it shows them that they're not bigoted, they're not racist. So they use it in that kind of way. And I think it's unfortunate because we're losing the real message of Martin Luther King, but someone else is basically telling us who Martin Luther King was, which is different than what he really was, what we knew him as.
So what should the African-American community do about that?
I think the African-American community has to go back and understand what Martin Luther King's real legacy is for them, and to be much more actively involved in bringing about social change. So I think they've got to see that Martin Luther King Day celebration has become, everyone's become rather complacent, and it's nice to sit there and sing and dance, but you have to understand the impact this has in your community, because it doesn't really further the kind of activism that Martin Luther King would have subscribed to.
Well, Dr. Green, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thanks very much for having us. Dr. Alice Green is Executive Director of the Center for Law and Justice. Much more to talk about the media and these issues, and we'll have to wait for another time. I'm Michael Carrese. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Good night.
As well. So I think there are a number of reasons why we see a decrease in the crime rate right now, but we still see an increase in imprisonment. So that raises an interesting an issue there.
Sure. The death penalty, of course, is back in New York now. Does that have anything in your mind in terms of the reduction of crime here in New York State?
Absolutely not. I think it's been shown very clearly that capital punishment does not serve as a deterrent. We can look in states where they have the death penalty. Take Texas, for instance. Texas is killing an awful lot of people. They've resorted to killing 2 or 3 people a day. But the crime rate, the murder rate in Texas is very high. In states like Maine, where it's we don't kill people, the crime rate is low. So I don't think there's any relationship at all.
Tougher sentences for drug offenders, is that the answer, or?
Well, it's definitely not the answer. We certainly see an increase in incarceration rates as a result of the Rockefeller drug laws. I mean, someone with a minor drug offense can get a sentence from 15 years to life. It makes absolutely no sense. These are not violent people who can't be treated in the community. It's simply given rise to this prison industrial complex that I mentioned before. So Rockefeller drug laws certainly need to be repealed. They serve no constructive function whatsoever. We also have to get rid of the second felony offender law, which mandates the incarceration of people who might not be violent. The other thing is we're labeling a number of crimes as violent crimes, and I think the community reacts to that in in a devastating way. But when we refer to violent crimes that Pataki refers to, he's talking about, he includes things such as burglary. When no one's home, if you go in someone's house and they burglarize it, that's considered a violent offense, and he wants to eliminate parole for someone like that. It also includes women who have been abused and might end up in some way committing a violent act. Mm-hmm. But that is also, they're also included under this violent offender statute.
Sure. This is something that will be discussed certainly at the state capitol over the next couple of weeks, and
yes.
We'll have to see what happens with all of this, but for now we're out of time. Dr. Alice Green, the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Justice, has been our guest on Q&A this evening. Thanks for joining us. And that's all the time we have for all of us here at WMHQ. I'm Gary Carter, and we'll see you again next time.